For over 50 years, a single question has haunted American true crime. Who was the Zodiac Killer? He terrorized lovers' lanes, murdering at least 5 people and holding an entire community in a grip of fear. He wasn't just a killer, he was a performer. He taunted police with bizarre letters and ciphers, gave himself a name and a symbol, but never showed his face. Then he just vanished. But one name has always been at the heart of the investigation, a name that for many is the only one that truly matters. Arthur Leigh Allen. He was a quiet former school teacher and the only suspect the police ever publicly named. In this video, we're going to build the case against him piece by piece to show you why so many were convinced he was the Zodiac. Then we'll examine the shocking facts that unravel that very same case, the evidence that could prove his innocence and leave us right back where we started, chasing a ghost in the fog. The Zodiac story begins on a cold December night in 1968. On a lonely stretch of Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. High school students David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were on their first date. They were suddenly and brutally shot and killed. There was no clear motive, no witnesses, and almost no clues. It was just the beginning. Over the next 10 months, the killer struck again and again. Each attack was bolder and more sadistic than the last. A shooting at Blue Rock Springs, a frenzied stabbing at Lake Berryessa, where the killer wore a terrifying executioner's hood with a crosshair symbol. And finally, the cold-blooded murder of cab driver Paul Stein in the middle of San Francisco. It was after that second attack that the killer named himself. In letters to local newspapers, he announced, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He proved it was him by sharing details only the killer could know and dared police to identify him by including complex ciphers. The Bay Area was paralysed. Who was this monster who killed for sport and craved the spotlight? Police investigated thousands of suspects, but one name kept surfacing: Arthur Leigh Allen from Vallejo, the very heart of Zodiac country. To understand why Arthur Leigh Allen became suspect number 1, you have to look at the mountain of circumstantial evidence that piled up against him. On paper, he just seemed to fit. Let's start with the basics. Allen lived in Vallejo, a stone's throw from the first 2 crime scenes. He knew the area. Beyond that, he owned things that were unnervingly similar to items linked to the Zodiac. He wore a Zodiac brand watch, which featured the exact same crosshair symbol the killer used as a signature. A small detail maybe, but in a case this cold, it was a blazing red flag. He also wore size 10.5 shoes, the same size as boot prints found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. Police searches of his home later turned up weapons, including a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used in some of the attacks. But the case against Allen goes way beyond a few weird coincidences. It gets into chilling confessions and deeply disturbing behaviour, mostly thanks to one man, Donald Cheney. In 1971, Don Cheney, who had been a friend of Allen's, walked into a police station and told a story that blew the case wide open. Cheney claimed that back in 1969, before the Zodiac was a household name, Allen had described a terrifying fantasy. He told Cheney he wanted to hunt people, attaching a flashlight to a gun to shoot couples in cars. He said he would taunt the police with letters detailing his crimes and sign them with the symbol from his watch, the Zodiac. According to Cheney, Allen even used the name Zodiac before the killer did publicly. If Cheney was telling the truth, it was a blueprint for the entire Zodiac spree, hatched in Allen's mind before it ever happened. Cheney's story put Allen directly in law enforcement's crosshairs. During their investigation, more red flags appeared. After the brutal stabbing at Lake Berryessa, Allen was interviewed and claimed he'd been scuba diving somewhere else that day. But investigators found bloody knives in his car. Allen's explanation was that he'd used them to kill chickens, but in the context of a gruesome knife murder, it was deeply unsettling. Then there was the timeline. The main flurry of Zodiac letters seemed to go silent around 1974. That same year, Arthur Leigh Allen was arrested for child molestation and sent to a Atascadero State Hospital for several years. The letters stopped when Allen was locked away. For investigators, it was a powerful, if not perfect, connection. For years, the case was stuck in this collection of almost and maybes, but in 1991, things changed. Michael Mageau, who survived the Zodiac's second attack back in 1969, was shown a photo lineup. Mageau had seen the killer's face lit by a flashlight just before the shooting started. From a set of old photos, he pointed to one man. It was Arthur Leigh Allen. According to reports, Mageau said, "That's him! It's the man who shot me." A survivor's ID, a supposed confession to a friend, suspicious belongings, and a criminal history that seemed to explain the Zodiac's disappearance. The case against Arthur Leigh Allen looked overwhelming. It seemed like they had their man. But what if they were wrong? What if the most compelling evidence was actually the most misleading? For every piece of evidence that seems to nail Arthur Leigh Allen to the wall, there's a counter-argument or a forensic fact that blows a hole in the theory. The public has long been told the story of a guilty man. Now, let's look at the story the physical evidence tells. It's a very different story. It's a lot to process, and we're about to go even deeper. If you love untangling historical mysteries like this one, do us a favour and hit that subscribe button. We live for this stuff. Now, back to the case. The case against Arthur Leigh Allen, while full of circumstantial drama, starts to fall apart when it hits the cold, hard wall of forensic science. In court, fingerprints and DNA are king. And here, the physical evidence doesn't just fail to implicate Allen. In many ways, it seems to clear him. Let's start with the letters. The taunting, misspelled notes were the killer's trademark. The handwriting was distinctive. Police collected countless samples of Allen's writing over the years. Multiple handwriting experts compared them. The conclusion was unanimous. Allen's handwriting did not match the Zodiac's. Some argue Allen was partially ambidextrous and could have disguised his script, but a police analyst who worked the case for decades was firm, stating that after looking at boxes of Allen's writing, none of his writing even came close to the Zodiac. Next, fingerprints. This is maybe the most powerful evidence against the Allen theory. The Zodiac was careful, but not perfect. At the scene of the Paul Stein taxi murder, the killer left a bloody partial fingerprint on the cab. Police also lifted prints from some of the letters. Arthur Leigh Allen's fingerprints were compared to these prints time and time again. The result? No match. Decades later, new technology offered the hope of a final answer. In 2002, investigators managed to extract a partial DNA profile from saliva on the stamps and envelopes of Zodiac letters. That DNA was compared against a sample from Arthur Leigh Allen. Again, the result was a clear exclusion. It wasn't a match. Now, it's fair to point out that the viability of this DNA sample is debated. Some researchers, like Tom Voigt, have noted the DNA was from the outside of a stamp, not from the seal, which keeps Allen a viable suspect for some, but the official forensic analysis at the time cleared him. So, to recap, the handwriting, the fingerprints and the DNA don't match. In any modern investigation, that would be enough to cast serious doubt on a suspect. But the problems don't stop there. Let's look at the witnesses again. Michael Mageau's dramatic identification is often cited as the key link, but it's not that simple. The ID happened in 1991. More than 22 years after the attack. An eyewitness memory is notoriously unreliable over that much time. More importantly, another key witness directly contradicted him. Officer Donald Fouke was one of the first cops at the Paul Stein murder scene. Minutes after the shooting, he and his partner saw a man walking away from the area. They got a brief look at his face and build. When later shown a picture of Arthur Leigh Allen, Fouke was adamant. The man he saw that night was not Allen. He said Allen was far heavier, by his estimate around 100 pounds heavier than the man he saw, and that Allen's face was too round. That's a description from a trained officer moments after the crime of a man who looked nothing like Arthur Leigh Allen. What about the confession to Don Chaney? While it sounds damning, Chaney's story has been questioned over the years. Some investigators believe he may have held a grudge or embellished his account, mixing real conversations with his own theories after the case became famous. Even the circumstantial evidence starts to look flimsy. That Zodiac watch, a common, popular brand at the time. The bloody knives, while suspicious, his alibi that he was scuba diving was at least partially corroborated. And the timeline, while the main burst of letters tapered off before his arrest, the last confirmed Zodiac letter was sent in January 1974, and a disputed but possible Zodiac letter surfaced in 1978 after Allen was released from the hospital, which complicates that neat theory. Ultimately, even the police who chased him for years had to face the facts. Dave Tosche, the lead SFPD inspector on the case, was convinced for years Allen was the guy, but by the end, he had to admit that all the evidence against Allen had turned out to be negative. Arthur Leigh Allen died of a heart attack in 1992, a free man, never charged with any of the Zodiac murders. Focusing on Allen so heavily often makes us forget just how vast and bizarre this case is. He was the main suspect, but just one of roughly 2,500 people investigated by the SFPD alone. The Zodiac universe is full of other suspects, lingering questions, and of course those infamous ciphers. The Zodiac sent 4 cryptograms. The first, the Z408, was solved in a week by a teacher and his wife, revealing a rambling message about collecting slaves for the afterlife. But it didn't have a name. The most notorious, the Z340, remained unsolved for 51 years. It baffled the FBI and generations of sleuths. Finally, in 2020, a team of private citizens, an American software engineer, a Belgian programmer, and an Australian mathematician cracked it. The world held its breath. The message was just another taunt. I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber. Again, no name. 2 shorter ciphers remain unsolved to this day. The fact that the ciphers never named a suspect has only fueled theories about other men. For a while, a suspect named Lawrence Kane gained traction. A woman claiming the Zodiac abducted her later identified Kane as her attacker. But like Allen, no hard evidence ever surfaced. More recently, in 2021, an independent group called the Casebreakers made headlines by naming a new suspect, Gary Francis Post, a veteran who died in 2018. They claimed to have photographic evidence matching scars on his forehead to the police sketch and anagrams in the ciphers that spelled his name. However, law enforcement, including the FBI, remains skeptical and the case officially remains open. And the list goes on. Ross Sullivan, a library worker who resembled the sketch. Earl Van Best Jr., accused by his own son. Richard Gaikowski, a local reporter. It's a revolving door of plausible but unproven suspects, each showing why the simple narrative of "it was Arthur Leigh Allen" might be more fiction than fact. So, after all these years, where does this leave us? Was Arthur Leigh Allen the Zodiac Killer? On one hand, you have a story that feels almost too perfect to be false. A man who allegedly told his friend his dark plans, owned a Zodiac watch, lived in the killer's backyard, and was identified by a survivor. It's a powerful and compelling portrait of guilt. On the other hand, you have the quiet, objective testimony of science. Handwriting that doesn't match, fingerprints that don't match, and DNA that doesn't match. You have a police officer who saw the killer and said, point blank, it wasn't Allen. In the world of justice, physical evidence is supposed to trump suspicion and storytelling, and the physical evidence here consistently points away from Arthur Leigh Allen. What we know for sure is this: a killer calling himself the Zodiac murdered at least 5 people, terrorized Northern California, and was never caught. The case against Arthur Leigh Allen is a maze of contradictions, a battle between damning circumstances and exculpatory facts. It's a story with all the pieces of a solved crime, but they just won't fit together. He remains the most famous suspect in America's most famous unsolved case, a man forever tied to the ghost of the Zodiac, whether he was the monster himself or just another victim of the hunt. After hearing both sides, what do you believe? Was Arthur Leigh Allen a mastermind who planted false evidence to fool everyone, or was he an innocent man caught in the crosshairs of a historic and frustrating manhunt? Let me know your theory in the comments below, and thanks for watching.